All right, and we are live, I believe. So, Joe, appreciate you coming on again, man. After a week after your podcast dropped, I know you're not even in the office here, are you?
No, I'm on the road back again. It's nice to see. We're at September 1st. The summer's over. Already back on the road again. And the fall season of seeing people in person, I think, is going to come back pretty strong. We have these in our industry. This is sort of this conference season that starts up in September, October, November, and that's in the post-COVID world. I think that there's going to be a lot of people seeing each other. So I'm excited for that. So.
Yeah. I haven't been out in quite a while. We've had a couple of invites. I'm kind of sad that so many overlap or are like back to back. So it's like, I'm a like introverted, like a homebody too. I don't like to be out for like weeks at a time or turn around and leave again. So it's unfortunate to have to sort of pick and choose which ones you go to. Are you any specifically that you're sort of excited about?
Yeah, there's a few that I'm definitely going to. So there's the D Farm conference
Hmm.
in Boston, and that's September 13th, 14th or so. They do this a week-long thing in Boston. There's this mobile and clinical trials conference. There's some events at different locations in Boston, and but the D Farm disruptive innovations in pharma is a popular one for at least in the circles I've been running in for a while. It attracts a lot of like sort of the innovators in pharma that are trying to change a lot of things, and the event showcases a lot of our peers, our colleagues, clients, partners, everybody that have actually done something, and they have a case study to talk about, which is kind of cool.
Sure.
So it's a lot less lip service and a lot more what have you done and how did it go?
Well,
And
and that's interesting to me. And this is actually one of my short on my short topic list is that, it feels like there's a lack of maybe like good peer review and real strong data in terms of like some of these DCT solutions. I think that'll start to really flow more. I know we've seen some publishing here and there. I don't
mhm.
know how broad the scope has been, and if that's good, bad, or indifferent at this point.
I think there's a lot more publishing being done. The problem with publishing is it just takes so long. And so
Sure,
you have something to talk about, and it could be 9 months before it's published. And depending on who's publishing, if it's academia, if it's pharma, they have all the time in the world. If you're a tech company that wants to talk about the cool thing you've done, you want it out as fast as possible, right? So it's a balance. But
sure.
the peer reviewed type publications do carry a lot more clout in our industry for sure, as opposed to like a blog or a press release or something. It kind of shows that it's been reviewed and it's legitimized a bit more. That's good to invest time in. I see a lot of that. So at companies like events like DFarm, you see a lot of that turns into a lot of those publications. A lot of times,
Sure.
the best topics that I've seen are the sessions about something that failed. Like I remember this one session, like this is what we tried to do with using wearables in clinical trials. Like this was like 5 years ago, and here's how it went horribly wrong.
Right, right.
And like here's all things we learned. It was like the one of the more memorable sessions
Yeah, I've
from
I've
there.
I've,
So
I've heard some people criticize like we don't do enough sort of sharing our failures in this industry. So I think that is really encouraging and interesting. Because again, I mean, think about all the unpublished studies because
oh yeah.
they don't make it. So how that kind of like rolls over into the other aspects, and again how we can all learn from each other. So I love that. That's maybe not something we hear enough of that we
Mhm.
should. People don't like to air their dirty laundry, I guess. Though.
The more people should talk about the things that went wrong or the things that are unpublished and across the board, whether you're in pharma, whether you're in tech, whether you're at a site. I feel like that would be kind of fun to hear about, how you guys work and how things are changing and what works, what doesn't work. I think it's in just following you online and getting to know you a bit more. It's fascinating to someone like me and others. I mean, obviously you've seen quite a reaction, I think, from some of the stuff you put out there because people haven't heard this side very
Well,
publicly.
and
It's always in the shadows.
well, the irony is that like I feel like it's pretty, say completely universal, but a lot of it is stuff that we've all dealt with at the site level. But to your point, nobody's just really come out and talked about it. So you've got again all these 100 people going through the same same pain or the same experiences, but nobody can actually learn much from it or put together some other perspectives until we get it out there. So yeah, I feel like it's certainly sometimes risk looking like an idiot or, whatever the case may be. But ultimately, I hope it's for the the good of everyone else who either can help learn from it or maybe never have to go through it themselves.
I feel like it's always good to talk about what you're thinking and why it's a problem, and you then find out it's a problem for many others and why it hasn't been addressed and what the root cause is. And I feel like the following that you've started to curate is bringing a cross-functional group of people that probably haven't all talked in this way before together. Like I love meeting folks from sites, or like even when I was in a clinical trial myself back in, man, what was that, 2008, 9, something like that. I made, somewhat friends with the clinical coordinator when I was living in Raleigh. And she's like, "How do you know so much about what I do?" I'm like, "Oh, well, let me tell you about what I do for work." And I'm like, I'm in the trial because I'm interested in the trial, but I'm also
Right.
interested in like the process. And that trial, everything was run on paper. There were no widget device, nothing electronic. It was just totally done the old way. So the irony is that I myself have never run a clinical trial on paper in my life, in my world of running clinical trials from the variety of different roles. But the one clinical trial I was in was completely paper based. So,
Well, and that's interesting. I mean, I still think like I mean, this is a hard, tricky way to walk the line here. I mean, a lot of what we do is still on paper. I mean, in terms of, we
yeah.
talked about eSource a little bit during the episode before, and I might be
Hmm.
interested in like popping up on some of that. Obviously, ePro and eCOA are becoming way more prevalent, but to a very large degree, I mean, a lot of source documents are still they're still paper. So that's why I also think it's really fun to hear and have these conversations, because there are people who are asking me questions like, "Oh, well, why don't you use this, or have you used this?" I'm like, "No, that's not really what's happening yet." Like, there's still two worlds, I think, in terms of mm, mindset or perspective as to what's actually happening on the ground in a lot of these trials. Again, I think that is, to your point, changing. I've worked on studies that have full paper e-diaries.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a mess, but
it is.
helping bridge that gap, right? I mean, isn't that that's what we're trying to do? Um, but it's challenging. It's challenging. Again, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings or false assumptions as to how things work across sites. And we talked about this before too. Sites are crazy diverse. Like, they're all different
Very.
in terms of what they adopt and what they don't, and how they operate and how they don't, which makes this even more of a just pain, kind of wrangling everybody together, right?
I wanna flip the table on you for a second, as I told you I might do this, right?
Please.
So I want to know more about your site organization, how you fit into that diverse profile of sites. Like, who are you? Where do you fit into the? I mean, you're obviously not an academic center, but you're affiliated with hospitals or academic centers. So you're an independent site, right? Or you have a network of you have a network? Do you have multiple sites? Like,
Yeah, it's a good question, and I honestly struggle with sort of like defining what we do as well. And I've heard
okay,
others use things like integrated research organization or things like that. If I had to sort of get, if you were to hold me down and tell me what, you know, make me tell you what we're called, I'd probably go with something like IRO. But we
okay,
have a standalone site that I'm here at here today, where we work with especially physicians who are unable to give us space within their clinics, or they work for systems where we can't get a contract or can't get in with. But our preferred model is integrated within practices, and it really started out as wanting to serve private practice physicians and community physicians, so that we still have a nice base. But as we've grown, we've started working more and more with the hospital and medical group that's also associated with them. So we've got sort of a central office within the hospital where we serve
mm,
all their different physicians and departments, and have sort of a centered, office within. So in some ways, I kind of refer to it as three
nice.
different models, but we're not really a site. And sometimes people ask me like, how many sites do you have? I'm like, well, I mean, it depends on what you mean, because a hospital could be one site, but there's also 15 departments, right? So
Yeah.
which is more important to know? Like, so
Well,
even
a site is a PI plus an organizational address, really.
right.
So
Yeah.
a
So
different PI and an address is a site for that. That's kind of a unique site entity in a way, even though you're at the same hospital or institution, you could be in a different place, right?
Yeah, and yes or no. I mean, from the outside looking in, you wouldn't know that we're not just part of the hospital, employees or part of the hospital staff. I mean, we don't look or act much different. Um, the idea is that they don't have to carry FTE, they don't have to find and manage, a bunch of employees with like a very specific knowledge base. Clinical trials are not exactly like a huge thing here in Oklahoma. So there's not a lot of places to go to get good talent. So if you're trying to build that from scratch, it can be challenging. And I'm sure you've heard this, like even a lot of big institutions who you would think are successful lose a lot of money doing clinical research. It's not a money making proposition for them. It's a
No,
burner.
it's a slim margin business. It's a very, I mean, COVID probably wiped out many sites that just couldn't survive through the pandemic, especially when trials just stopped. And those who survived adapted. And yeah, of course, yeah, it's a, and just getting paid. The fact that we're working in an industry just getting paid is difficult in general is
Dude,
just fascinating to many. I think that wonder why. But yeah,
it's mind boggling, I think, to when you realize, and I say this almost every day to somebody on my team. I'm like, I don't know how this has even stayed propped up so long, this model of sites. I mean, Frank, and this kind of leads me into maybe some more interesting topics here, but
yeah, sure.
there was a DCRA released their glossary, and there was some discussion around the definition of a decentralized clinical trial, which
I saw your note on that one.
kind of just
That was
putting
good
out. And
feedback.
I don't know if it's good or not. I mean, I think that if that's the intended like definition, that's perfectly fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's I just hate to see it sort of like specifically call out the reduction or elimination of site visits, even though I know that's like a byproduct of what we're doing here, right? But
Sure.
it feels a little bit alienating or isolating to put it in the very definition itself. Am I like completely off base to have that? Like, you have sites who have always been kind of scared that their role is going to be diminished. I don't think that's necessarily true, and I even think the people who maybe came up with that definition didn't intend for it to have that slant to it. But I think if you read it, oh, there you are. All right. Well, I think we had an issue with the stream here. If anybody's watching out there, let me know if we're broken.
You
Oh,
back?
you're back.
Can you hear me? No, I went off. That was me or you. Sorry. You
No,
were
no
saying?
worries. No, I mean, I guess is that a reasonable criticism of the definition, or do you think I'm off base here? I mean, I'm
No,
open to
you're not.
hearing
You're not. You're not.
people's thoughts, because again, I understand I have a somewhat narrow perspective. I like to think that I don't necessarily, but I also accept that I probably do. So again, am I off base here?
You're not unreasonably. No, you're not. And I think the reason is because this is very similar to the topics and the conversations we had around being patient centric. That when we word things a certain way, patients just take it that's not at all done the right way. And so I don't think anyone has talked enough to sites about what they think about this, especially in such a sensitive topic. Now I know within DTRA there is site representation. I just don't think it's enough. And if this is getting a lot of, and the glossary is done, the definitions have been made, and already there was a number of people I think popped up in that thread that you posted about this were definitions I think that were just as good if not better. And so if we're all about being to me DCT, however it's rising in adoption, it's not defined as the thing that everyone knows what it is yet. We're defining it as we go. Many different stakeholders across many different organizations um, are defining what it is, and I think we're learning as we go, right? Just like this is a new category of stuff, right? Which eventually will disappear into the ether as just doing trials, right? But it'll
Yeah,
be the
right,
better way
right,
to
right.
do it.
Yeah, that's
So
perfectly fair. It just feels oddly narrow in a way that I wouldn't think you'd want to define it if you were especially if you were an advocate for decentralized trials, right? I feel like you'd want a
Yeah.
broader, maybe perhaps a broader, more inclusive definition that doesn't, again, sort of
Maybe
call
you
out.
should maybe you should join DTRA. Your site should join.
I'm not sure I don't have the pockets for that, but we'll see. But no, again, I think look, it's easy for me to be a critic. I completely understand that it's like exceptionally challenging to sort of try to make everybody happy with one broad definition that's not so vague that it is pointless. You know what I mean? So I acknowledge the fact that it's easy to be critical of it, but it's certainly more challenging. But to your point, I think there were some really great definitions in there that were uh, potentially better than
Yeah.
the one that was offered.
To me, the success in decentralized trials means you have to be both patient-centric and site-centric, and just aware of all the different stakeholders that are now going to be part of the process that perhaps in the past were not, or had a very limited role in the past. And I think that this changes things it's a multi-level change. And we'll learn along the way about the things we need to be sensitive to or aware of that we weren't before. And this is one.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's fair. And also, just randomly, I mean, I'd love to hear some questions. I know we've got a few questions in the audience here, but along the way, I'd love to hear more. But to go back to that, and this is a question I had sort of pondered and maybe even asked publicly recently. I mean, do you feel like site adoption could potentially make or break the success of DCT to some degree? I mean, if sites won't use it or won't do it, don't see the value in it, how much does that gunk up the works, or does it not matter because ultimately sites are going to become less and less necessary, or at least less necessary in the form that they are now, so that it doesn't matter? Or again, would site adoption, or potentially the opposite, let's flip it, heavy site adoption could really blast this stuff off and get us further down the road much quicker? Like, again, what role does site adoption have? Yeah, I think I lost you again. All right. Well, I'm learning something about StreamYard. It's I don't know if it's StreamYard or internet connection, but feels like we're a little laggy here. I'm actually going to remove Dustin, or Joe rather, add him back. There you are again. I don't know if it's your side or my side, but
we're back now. There we go. The question you were about to say was?
I guess, what role do you feel site adoption could have in the success or failure of DCT as a whole?
I think it's a major part of it more now than ever, and I'll tell you why. So I think in the past, let's say the past 20 years, and this has been the weird thing in our industry. I brought this up in our podcast that we did, that we're in a unique situation where the user, the person with the money, and the actual buyer could be three different entities. The user could be the site, user could be the patient, they're not buying it. The buyer could be the CRO, but the funder is the sponsor, right? And so it's like, or it could be any mixture of a few of these things. So we're not into direct to consumer world, we're in the B2B world for sure. And sites in the past were, in a way, I think it's kind of a renaissance. Hear me out, right? Like from 20 years ago, when it was paper-based trials, you guys were just conducting studies the way you did it, and sites were hired in the way that you deal with all your stuff. You have your own regulatory control processes internally. There were really no electronic medical records. You had your charts, and they were maintained record-keeping standards and whatnot. And you just ran research the way that you ran research, and then we had to get all that data out in some kind of standardized way. So they would force you to fill out paper source documents. You send them off somewhere. Someone double data enters it somewhere in the world. It eventually shows up in a database a month later, where we then issue a bunch of queries a month and a half later, where then you have to go find the information that's in a box somewhere in your office and figure out what to change. Right now, to fix that, now we said, okay, we're going to give you EDC. or something, right? And so we'll force everyone to use the tool that we want. That means that now you're going to do the data entry, but we're going to be able to do things faster. Queries will fire immediately when things are wrong. We'll have data checking to ensure consistency, reduce discrepancies, do immediate queries when necessary, reduce the time to database lock on our side, on the sponsor side, and get the trial done faster in theory. Now we're saying, well, if sites are digitally enabled now, maybe they could then go back to doing it the way they want to do it, and we just have to take it. But I don't think that's going to be the mainstream anytime soon. I do think it's the rising trend. And so back to the paper world, we're going to go back and let you do things the way you want to conduct your research, except the difference is now is you're using Part 11 compliant regulatory grade systems that pharma's using, but now the site controls it, right? That's the big shift, is that now the data and the way you're collecting your data is up to snuff with the way we want to collect your data. And we can get data from you in ways that are more standardized. This is the e-source thing that you and I talk about.
Right.
And in the industry, I think is a rising thing. The barrier to that is that the sites don't all have the money to afford it. And the sites don't all want to change. And the sites maybe just don't know how, don't have the time, don't have the resources. But in theory, implementing this type of technology, which I know there's probably people listening out here that have done that and reduced the amount of admin work their staff has to do by a huge percent. And that would mean that you can do more with less with the advent of technology. Which means that as more and more technology is being thrown at you, you may have more street cred to say no, because you have now something they could use where before you did not.
Well,
and
well,
I think that might be the deciding factor.
Yeah, well, and let's take that a step further, and where we can almost tie it back into our definition here. I mean, to that point, sites could provide their own mobile or home health service at that point, right? And sites could also, maybe sites have their own partnerships with other local healthcare providers or labs or whatever the case may be. So in many ways, while the definition part that kind of hung things up was moving things away from a traditional research site, maybe sites still own that process, right? Maybe sites still do. It's not some random third party necessarily that's taking over these things, but sites themselves still manage it, both front and back end. I mean, does that seem realistic? Or, obviously there's there's hundreds of companies right now or services all sort of vying for these different small chunks of the ecosystem, it feels like. But does this open a path for sites to be the ones to own it?
I think it does. And I think that true interoperability between sponsors and sites means that there have to be ways to connect that are standardized and not custom, because no sponsor is going to want to pay to do custom integrations and deal with the IT departments of 100 sites across the world. But if we could even get 20% of them automated and connected to some sort of e-source feed or some workflow that would allow you to do the work the way you work, so you could be more efficient. You do the same processes for every trial, every sponsor the way you work, and then can connect to the sponsor's ecosystem and through some API or some kind of portal, something that is not custom, does not require IT department to do clearing, firewall work for 3 months, and doesn't cost $1 million in consultants to get it done. Then that's your trick. And I would take 20% over zero,
Sure.
Then the sponsors would have to figure out how to, okay, the data acquisition is now coming through a different way. The human's not entering it. We don't have to do source data verification. It just shows up. It's in the same system. And we can still issue queries and do all of our data cleaning and work, but it's going to be more accurate. It's going to be less queries. We're going to get it faster. And you guys have a better experience because you don't have to pay admins to enter the data. It just happens.
It pops in. Well, and so that also brings about another question. I think you commented on sort of, do you see this eating into the role of the CRO, at least on the sort of site facing level? And because to me, what you're describing is eating up a lot of hours that CROs would usually spend sending people out, verifying data, going through all the rigmarole that they do with sites, that sites deal with and love. I've had 3 monitors this week, and it's not fun. But
the visits are still long. Still long visits.
Oh man, they're too long. Too long. Make them short.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah. No, I mean, do you see that uh, potentially eating up some of that? And if so, is that a bad thing? Is that a threat to CROs, or do we just, again, it's just about adapting and changing?
Yeah, it's about adapting. I mean, we went through this trend back in the when risk-based monitoring was the buzzword, and this was 2016, 18, something like that. Now become what we call risk-based quality management. And the talk track was, oh, CROs are going to hate it because it eats into their budgets and they make all their money from sending people out on visits that really have no value. And the answer is, well, everyone's adapting. I would say that remote monitoring visits are more common now. I don't know how many you're doing, but I'm sure there's more and more monitoring visits that are being requested to be remote to get remote access to your data. So they're not just showing up on site with a bunch of binders, but they will still come. They just will come less frequently. They're still charging for this time. They put it in the budget elsewhere. It's not like they're losing money. It's just being reallocated. But if they can get technology to do the work for them, wouldn't I mean, one could argue that it's still worth the same, if not more, if you can do it faster. It's like paying an artist to do a logo, right? You see that video out there. Do you want me to do it? If I can do it in 5 minutes and get it for you just as well versus spending 5 days on it, isn't my time worth more? Right? Isn't the quality worth more? But again, that doesn't always work in our industry because everyone's trying to bring the cost of everything down because it's just too expensive
Right.
and because it's too manual. And so if you put automation into the place, in theory, it should streamline the cost. It should reduce the cost slightly. It'll improve the margins of these companies drastically, which then helps everybody. Um, so I
Yeah.
don't
Okay.
think
That
we'll get into
makes
the
sense.
model, but every CRO is figuring out how to deal with decentralized trials. They all have a practice for it. They all have different business models that are adapting and testing and working in that model. Um, but technology is the ally here to help make that work.
So, I mean, if you know, or if you're able to say, like, who's getting it right, or what examples are we seeing of, like, I look on these threads that I start, and I've, hear site level people, and frankly, in my experience so far, it's been kind of overstated, the effect. I mean, there's some studies, yeah, they have mobile health or home health options. We're not really even like encouraged to use them unless we feel like it, which oftentimes isn't necessary. Of course, it's nice to have there, if we want. And then there's, yeah, really, I don't see any direct to patient shipments throughout any of our studies. E-consent is even really not utilized nearly as much as I would have
Hmm.
imagined it would be by now. Um, I mean, is there, are there good examples out there getting it right? But to my point, again, the people I am seeing who are getting kind of drug into these at the site level don't seem like it's been a great experience. Again, I know this is going to take time to
Yeah.
mature and sort of figure out, but man, how long are we in for it? Because it's already tough. It's already very tough at the site level to manage even
Yeah.
the the piece together systems we use now. Like, is this going to, again, is it going to push away more sites? Is it going to be harmful before it's beneficial? I mean, how do you see that playing out over what period of time?
If I'm honest with you, this is going to be an 8-year cycle, 8 to 10 years. And you're going to see a number of things happen in different key milestones. This is very, very much um, a deja vu moment from 2010, whereas all these different changes, digital transformation in pharma is happening again. It's just being influenced now by a post-pandemic world. I will say that many of the changes that are coming are going to be influenced by patients, right? Uh, who's getting it right? I'll give you one example that hits close to home. We were at the DIA conference. There was this session happening with Ken Getz, who's a academic from Tufts and does a lot of data analysis in our industry, and we had this one session on trying to figure out, the value of decentralized trials, which a lot of pharma companies have been trying to figure out, like, how do we send the business case to our teams? We all know we want to do it. We just need to know the numbers. This patient stands up in the session unprompted, and I'll say this just knowing it's about my own company, but I'm not trying to be a salesperson here. She came up and said, like, I was on this clinical trial and I had this mobile app, and it was, I've been in clinical trials before, and this app from Medable, like, why doesn't everybody have this? Like, I would never enroll in a clinical trial ever again if I didn't have an app like this that helped me get through it, that not only asked me what to do every day, but also gave me all this other information in the app. And she stood up and said that in the crowd of like 400 people, right? And we're like, we didn't have anything to do with it.
It was a plant.
Not at all planned. No, seriously, it wasn't. But then we went and talked to her afterwards, and she's just like, I have this, condition, and da da da, and finding a clinical trial with patients in areas that we've never been able to find before, like in maybe Oklahoma, you're going to see more because the awareness is a problem. You're going to see changes that are influenced by the people that it benefits the most. And if we're trying to find patients and trying to get them into trials and make it worth their while to get a benefit out of it, also benefit research, it needs to be driven by the people that are going to help improve the experience. To me, I think the experience is number one. It's going to be an 8-year thing. I saw it with EDC and changing that experience. And I will tell you that EDC turned out in a way that was not the original intent of how it was supposed to be. EDC was supposed to be used at the site. The site was supposed to, control it. They were supposed to entering directly into the computer. No, don't keep the paper documents, but that's how pharma adopted it, right? And EDC became this like other thing. You didn't change the original process. You just added another thing and reduced the time it took to send the data over here and have the sites do it. So it wasn't the original intent of what it was supposed to be. So we have to make sure that we're talking to the right people and actually solving the right business problems with new capabilities that people never had. And that's going to take time. And over the next 3 years, you're going to see a lot of changes happen all at once. And then in 5 years, you're going to see consolidation. You're going to see proof that these business problems have value and have a solution, and then the stakeholders accepting it. And over 8 years, you'll have clear leaders of like, now here's the new way to do it. And there won't be, it won't just be two, it'll be more, but it'll consolidate to more. I mean, there's hundreds of new companies that are popping up that are using the decentralized trials tag, right? And that's going to frustrate folks like you at the site, right? Now you have 20 logins again. I think we got it under control up until about 2019.
Right.
And then we're in a whole new place now.
I think it puts, people like me in a bad position, not a bad position, a tough spot, because look, I want things to be easier for the patient and the site. And obviously there's, a lot of opportunity to do that. But, in the meantime, the growing pains are very challenging to deal with in an industry that's already very challenging to deal with. So it's sort of that like, we all want the same thing here, but I feel like disproportionately one side is going to get the bigger brunt of the hardship and growing pains, if that makes sense, because we're the ones who have to use it on the ground, keep the patients engaged, keep them involved, walk them through it. Also try to keep our doors open because we're not getting paid necessarily to do tech support and, sort of liaison patients through these different tech services.
You're not the genius bar.
No, but I mean, that's a good idea. Actually, I'm going to slip that into my budget next to a study that we have. I like it.
There you go. But the value of DCT to you, which then helps you be more attractive to sponsors by embracing kind of the idea, is just access to more patients that they can't get. And the interesting,
listen, I know you're not wrong. My what's been frustrating for me is like I've even come to sponsors with solutions that are debatably DCT, and I said, look, we want to use this. It'll help us identify more patients. It may leave patients in their treating physician offices or whatever. I've taken different concepts to the sponsors and saying like, look, we want to do this, only to sort of see it get shot down, over and over again. So again, it's sort of like, what are we doing? Like, are we doing this or are we not doing this? Because I want to be there, but it feels, again, sort of, you feel helpless a little bit at a site level because, to what degree can we help the adoption in a way that's useful for us and not let the industry decide in a vacuum. Again, does that make sense?
It does. I'd be really curious to see if anyone out there whoever's listening. I don't know if you can see how many people are here, but if there's any comments out there in the live audience, go ahead and pop a comment in the comment box. And
there's a decent crowd. I'm surprised it's been kind of quiet out there. I'd like to hear some questions, but I don't know if we're gonna get maybe everybody's tired.
Controversial enough.
Everyone's tired after lunch. It's been a long week.
Yeah, that's very true. It's the end of the summer, right? I think just going back to some of the topics, right? Like think about, I don't know. I think about the entry level to decentralized trials, and this is one of the topics we can talk about other ones, I'm sure. But everyone like doing ePro or eCOA on a mobile device is not decentralized trials, right? That's one of the things that's involved in the process, but that doesn't mean you're doing a DCT. Here's what I've noticed, like in my time in pharma and my time on the technology side, if you get a protocol from a sponsor or even a CRO, regardless of who you are, if you get that and say, "Hey, I want you to bid on this," you're already too late. You need to have a strategic relationship with pharma to get early into their portfolio with the therapeutic heads and the different teams to be able to influence the design of the study so that A is designed with the patients in mind. Two should also be designed with the different types of sites you want in mind, because remember, the site is not one concept of the site anymore.
Right.
uh, and be able to make the technology work for you that's not a deviation from the standard. You need to be able to write that stuff into the protocol so that the things that we all want to do are actually technically allowed. You asked me earlier, like, who's doing it right? The problem is who's doing it right now. I think we're going to learn a lot of these at these conferences of people pitching, and we're now like what 2 years after the pandemic. There's going to be a lot of, you're going to have people from Pfizer and Moderna and other companies out there talking about how they went through the state of emergency and they just like willed it to happen. But that's not scalable. Like the best conversation I had with someone at Pfizer about how they made it through the pandemic. I mean, they got 44,000 patients through trials and a drug approved in 9 months.
I mean, it's
And
amazing.
what everyone told me was the amount of hours we worked was insane.
Yeah, no,
And everyone, right?
I've heard from every CRA who worked on one. They're like, it was absolutely insane. I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to go through that again.
So then how do you take the elements that worked in a state of emergency when the regulations were relaxed, which is why everybody changed, by the way. We've changed because we want to help patients, but also the regulations were relaxed to a point where we can take a risk and we're not going to get punished for it if it goes wrong, and we're not worried. That changed everything. And we're not talking about like no safety regulations that were relaxed. I'm talking about like
Sure.
regulatory inspections and flags on data, and like I'm submitting an e-consent versus another consent, and the IRBs shoved things through, and they had a fast track process. That stuff now needs to be scaled and be like, the process of how it works on a day-to-day basis where you're not working ridiculous needs to happen. And I think that's happening now. The whole no going back thing that a lot of people talked about was because we didn't want to slip back into our old ways once the regulations went back to what it was, right? Which needs to go.
Yeah, I say I think the irony is that we did. I think we did to some degree. Anyways, like we've seen a little bit of backsliding or less of those offerings being the standard. As soon as they didn't have to, or it wasn't sort of forced upon them by outside circumstances. So I don't know. Again, I mean, generally speaking, I'm hopeful, but I do find it, again, it's so freaking nuanced. There's so much. It's very challenging. Even in these conversations, I can have this conversation 1,000 times and may not get very far down the road because there's just so much to consider. There's a couple questions coming in here. I mean, I don't know if that's a fair statement that DCT tech doesn't enhance staff versus trying to replace and outsource. I think that's part of the question right now. I think is that, and also part of my sort of like kind of took a little bit of I took some arms up for the definition. I do think it could potentially enhance and further the reach of and impact of a traditional research site, not necessarily reduce or eliminate. To go back to the point though, it's like who's running the show here? Is it CROs? Is it tech companies? Is it the sites? And I think that's sort of feels like a struggle right now.
It is, but is it a struggle that can be like, can we all play in the same sandbox and all do well? And by do well, I mean like actually, get patients into trials to complete the goal of getting a drug to market. But can we also can we run a business? It has to be mutually viable, right? For all of parties involved for it to really work. So that's why I kind of have to follow money
Right.
when it comes to making that work. So to the question about like, does it, why aren't they attempting to enhance the staff versus replace them? I don't think DCT is supposed to outsource or replace sites. What they're doing is augmenting the experience to improve the experience for patients so that they listen, we need to figure out a way to make it easier for patients to find a trial. I work in this technology for 20 years. I still can't find trials when my friends ask me. I don't know.
Right.
There's no one place to go. There was a question earlier about uh, I saw in some thread somewhere about, why can't pharma band together and build like a one single portal for recruitment? And I think the main reason is competition. Like pharma patients are gold for companies to get their drug out first, right? They don't want to share that. But then that's the follow the money mentality. However, for patients, that would be an amazing tool to have, and we need to follow follow down the funnel for what's best for patients. Now, this is when it comes to the whole patient centricity thing. So we need to find a way to make it easier for patients to find a trial. We need to make it easier for patients to enroll, on board, and participate in the trial. So it needs to be a faster, easier, more informative, and convenient. Meaning, like, I can participate remotely. I can come into the clinic. I can go to the CVS. I can have the home health. I need those options, right? And as a result, those things should make it easier for a patient to stay in the whole trial, which then, in theory, when the statisticians look at your interim lock, they say, oh, we need 500 patients for the study. We can do it with 400 because we can use more of the data. And that's what everybody wants to see. They want to see an unknown ability to cut it short because we did better than we thought. And that is, that kind of planning is where I think a lot of this is going, or it's one of the markers of success, not the only one. I'll just wait here.
There we go.
And we're back.
Right. Sorry about that. So yeah, I wanted to throw up two more quick questions before we sign out here, but
do it.
Leanne, a good question. I think, obviously you just hit a bunch of different points there throughout your little spiel. I mean, with all of these considered, like, what would you prioritize, or what would you consider to be sort of like maybe it's the lowest hanging fruit or the most impactful, way to start?
That's hard to. It's I appreciate the simplicity in the question, because just tell me what to prioritize first, right? And what would, I'm sure you have a different answer than I would, than a pharma company focusing on oncology would, than a CRO focusing on something else would. So it's a very it's not a uniform answer. But if you had to try and summarize at any level, I'm just thinking live here. There's many things to prioritize, and to me, it's speed. Anything that maps to acceleration of a clinical trial timeline overall. And I think that sometimes we lose sight of this because, I mean, when I was in pharma, the goals, like, are stated like goals for the year in your comp plan and in your development plans and all that. That were cascading from the CEO down through VPs and whatnot. For clinical development operations, which runs all the trials, it was all speed. It was all acceleration, accelerate time to market, reduce time to database lock, accelerate patient recruitment. It was like the marketing slides in various tech companies that I've worked for in the past. I'm like, we did get it right.
Right.
Literally their goals. They're all tied.
That's what they want.
So
yeah, I mean, I would keep it even simpler than that. Like, at the site level, I would just love to see be able to more broadly reach patients with some DCT solutions. I know you hit on that for sure, but again, there's so many patients hiding out, quote unquote, across all these different treating physician offices or in rural areas or wherever the case is. So for me, I love to see it. First thing it address is reaching these patients that are difficult or impossible for sites to currently reach, and I feel like that alone would potentially like speed up the timeline so much that I think would have a pretty big impact, and it would also get sites some immediate value in enrolling more patients. I think it would sort of scratch everybody's back the right way. That I think would be a great way. Like, let's focus on the recruitment aspect and how we can sort of augment recruitment strategies? I mean, I would love to see that.
Recruitment is still the number one delay
Yeah.
in all
Yeah.
clinical trials overall. So, and it's still the biggest problem. There's no one solution you can get that will find your patients. There's many different places to go to when it comes to advocacy groups or apps, portals, services,
Right.
or even pharma companies that put up their own registries, all these kind of. So it's just so many different ways to go because people are looking for these trials in different ways. The awareness is so fragmented, depending on. Listen, I mean, especially in America and in the world, people don't really care about their health unless they're sick, right?
Right. Right.
And a lot of us try and gather a lot of data. I myself am like a data junkie and a geek on quantified self, trying to gather data because I don't know what I'm going to do with it now, but I hope eventually someday it'll help me do something
Sure.
that will be helpful someday when I need it. And so that's kind of in my mind right now.
Nice. I'm going to hit one more question from Nelson here, which is sort of an interesting,
Nice.
interesting thought, and something that I find interesting just by in and of itself is sort of the consolidation of sites and site networks, and if that has some effect on DCT. I guess, I mean, immediately, I guess if you're a big scaled up site network, like maybe you've already got a lot of touch points that maybe make some DCT solutions unnecessary. Does that seem fair? I mean, you're potentially leveraging data, from hundreds of clinics or hundreds of physicians. I mean, maybe then your need is a little bit more limited in terms of DCT. Would that be fair?
It could be. I mean, the idea of, I think what Nelson's getting at is that all these sites are joining giant conglomerates now, and the independent site is difficult to come by. So they're all going to, it's like, various brands being acquired by the giant multinational corp. They still have the individual brand, but they're owned by the big parent. If anything, I don't know if that changes the problems that DCT is trying to solve. And if in fact it just kind of scales out these individual operations that have specialties, like in Nelson's world, he specializes in, CNS type studies, right?
Right.
So you're always
Right.
going to have that specialty, but site network is going to bring you technology, support, resources, all these other things that supposedly they're supposed to help with. I don't know if that changes the problem. I think it just, I think it just makes the business run better. I'm totally naive in this area, so I don't know, but I don't know if it changes the problem necessarily. If it,
Yeah,
look,
I
the
think
whole
it's
point
a fair question. Yeah.
we're trying to improve clinical trial diversity for many reasons, scientific reasons, payer reimbursement reasons, and eventually probably government fueled reasons that will have incentives that will cause pharma companies to say we need to get our diversity numbers up because somewhere there's going to be some metric that's going to improve the stock price. And then, so again, follow the money, right? We need to, like, that's the reality of this. Like, you want to move people, you want to get things done for the right reason, you need to incentivize people. And then naturally, how do I get more diverse populations? We need to go to places that we're not going to today. How do we do that? Go down 3 levels. We need to change the way our protocols are designed so that we can decentralize the way we get to people and have them participate, and go to sites like, that are in these networks and not. So
I like it. I like it. All right. I know we're getting long on time here. Where can people reach out to you, find you online?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I get the Twitter handle @eClinical, and those are my 2 more common places. I'm also at Medible. So Joe. I don't have the Joe at medible.com. I need to do that. It's Joseph.
Oh man.
So Joseph at medible.com. But yeah, I'm always a voice out here. I'll see you at the DPharm conference. I think I'm going to see you at the CNS Summit in Boca Raton in November. Are you
Yeah,
coming
I
to
think
that?
that's the idea. Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I'll
So
be
if
there.
anyone wants to see Brad live in person, come to the CNS Summit in Boca Raton.
Make
Go
sure to just
register.
don't throw any rocks at me, please.
Don't
All right,
worry.
Joe.
Hey,
Shield me.
thanks so much for the time. I'll shield you.
All right, thanks, man. Take
All
it
right.
easy.
Take care. See you guys.